Welcome, everyone. I'm Jennifer Smith, your host for today, and with me is Jason Helson with the Michigan School Business Officials. And we will be talking today about what we can and can't tell you about the budget. Normally, this recording is to tell you what's there and what the governor has signed and what she's line itemed, but we don't have anything even close to that to talk about today. So please stay muted. We will record this and send this out at the end of the week. And any questions you have can be put in the chat. But we'll start with where we're at right now with the budget. Going back, the Senate passed their budget and all of their budgets at the end of March, early April. The House did not pass a budget until the beginning of June. And then they only passed the education budgets, MyLeap, MDE, school aid, higher education, and community colleges. So we don't have a full budget picture from the House yet. Then conversations started between, can we do the school aid budget, separate it from the general fund budgets, do it on its own? The Senate does not really want to do that because of the other pieces at play here, including a large road funding package that they want to get passed. The House had said they would, then they said they won't. We got a little bit of hope yesterday that they were actually going to get something done by the statutory deadline. But even though we started to hear rumors that they were working and that something was coming, the House adjourned at 9:30 at night without doing anything budget related. So unfortunately, this is where we sit. We have a House budget, we have a Senate budget, we have the governor's budget, but we have nothing combined, and they are all so very far apart. It's hard to give you advice on what it's going to look like at the end. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jason to talk a little bit more specifically about those and your process and what you might be able to expect.
By June 30th each year in order to be able to spend money in the new fiscal year, which starts July 1. And so you've done your duty, you've done your due diligence, you've heard the presentations from your superintendent and your finance director and maybe your finance committee of your Board of Education. You've had those budget hearings, so kudos to you. Certainly through that process, we always talk about budget assumptions, and budget assumptions are those key factors that you need to make quite often educated guesses on. And we all know that the springtime is a very busy and important time in school district budget processes. And so throughout the months of probably April and May and early June, you've nailed down and focused in on what those key factors are. At MSBO, we talk with our regional groups and our workshops and our conferences. And one of the things I talked about this year was the big four, was what I was calling them. And by the big four, I was referring to, what does your foundation allowance look like? What does your enrollment look like? Because we know declining enrollment is such a pervasive issue around the state of Michigan. What does your MIPSR's funding piece look like? And what do your MIPSR's expenditures look like? And by doing those four things, you can get a pretty good idea of what your baseline is. And so I'll just take a quick rundown, those four factors, and then we can talk about a few other budget factors as well. But foundation allowance, of course, the governor came out with $10,000 as the base foundation allowance. And of course, that was the headline in terms of the number, that the first time that we had proposed a $10,000 or higher foundation allowance. And so we're talking about on the order of about a 4.1% increase. And the Senate and the House really followed suit. Senate is at 10,008, House at 10,025 per pupil. And so as we progressed along in the spring, I really focused on, that $12,000 promise or proposal that the House had put out, and really talked with our membership about, that's kind of the shiny object. But when we start to break that down, it's really not a $12,000 foundation allowance, even in name, much less in form or function. And so as you look at, your per pupil funding and what your district is banking on, really the three proposals are quite tight right now: 10,000, 10,008, 10,025. So I would really encourage you to focus on that, and we can always come back and adjust later. Enrollment, we know that through Section 29, we've had declining enrollment funding the past several years, and I think that was one of the wins that came out of the School Finance Research Collaborative process. We also know that it doesn't fully fund that declining factor for districts. It's intended to fund 50% of the year over year decline, but because it's been so pervasive, it's been prorated. And so we know that we're about 300,000 students down from our peak in the early 2000s statewide, and we're over 200,000 students down since the implementation of Proposal A. So if your district is a declining enrollment district, you're certainly not alone. You're more the rule rather than the exception. Um, Again, we see this House proposal to roll up a lot of factors, and that's one of those factors that would get rolled up into this additional per pupil amount. Section 29 would be eliminated, whereas the House and the Senate have continued to fund that. MIPSers gets funded through Section 147 of the state budget, and this gets very complex. And we spend a lot of time within our membership with folks who are doing it day in and day out, and there's still a lot of questions. But it's important to know there's well over $2 billion annually that's going to subsidize the pension expenditures that districts are paying. And again, it's important to try to estimate what is your offset and what is the state subsidized portion. And so hopefully you've had those discussions at the state level. One of the quirks that we had in the recently completed school year was something called Section 147G, which was intended to offset and reimburse employees for their 3% healthcare contribution. So it's been a big benefit, I'll say, for teachers and staff around the state. But it's been a lot of work for business offices and superintendent and administrative offices to track and to come up with a system for paying that back and to work through that process. And so in all of the proposals, it would appear that is going to go away come 2025 as the 3% officially goes away on October 1, 2025. But there's still a lot of funding in Section 147, and that has a significant impact on your district. So it's important that your business office has a good handle on that and that you as the board members realize the impact that that can have, both in terms of your gross revenue and expenditures of your budget, as well as the bottom line. And then when we talk about MIPSers expenditure, this is our pension expenditure in the district budget. This goes to fund the pension for current staff and for retirees, and it's paid as a percentage of your payroll. And so we heard a lot throughout 24-25 of the 5.75% contribution reduction that's set to go into place October 1 of this year and will impact your budget in the upcoming year. What we saw when those rates were published this spring is your impact is probably going to be a little bit less than that. And so it's important to go through that process. And as we talk with our membership, districts were estimating anywhere on the range of 2.5% to 4% reduction of payroll was going to be the effective contribution rate reduction. And so if your district had banked on a real big savings there going into your 25-26 budget planning, that's something probably want to roll back. It's also important to note that the House proposal that was introduced in June actually does away with this reduction. So it really would count on a statutory change to eliminate this reduction before it even goes into effect. And so that would have a real negative impact on district budgets. Jen mentioned the multiple House proposals, and one of the key factors of the House proposal that was introduced in June of this year, I believe that was 4577, if I have that number right, was to roll up or eliminate a number of categorical grant funds and distribute those on a per pupil or per student basis. And this is a debate and a discussion that's been pretty, I think, pervasive in our membership, in MSBO's membership over the past several years. What we've seen coming out of the pandemic is we've seen rising state funds, but not all in the foundation allowance, of course, not all in the per pupil formula. And so we've seen introductions of new grant sources, new categoricals, if you will, within the state budget, and they've done a lot of good. You know, when we think about things like Section 31AA for school safety and mental health, that has been introduced in the last 5 years and has really exploded and funded a lot of mental health positions, a lot of SRO positions, and a lot of school safety initiatives. That's one of those that would get rolled up in this process and then distributed on a per pupil basis. And so the theory behind this, or the argument for this, is local control, right? If we eliminate and some of the strings that are attached to current funds and distribute those funds to the district, the superintendent and the Board of Education and the administrative team can decide how to best use those sources because they know their district the best. One of the pitfalls or drawbacks to this that I would see is this shifting of funds around naturally picks winners and losers. It takes money from districts that are allocated right now and kind of wipes the slate clean and then distributes it on a per pupil basis. And it feels to me, although I don't have, maybe hard and fast numbers to support this, but it feels to me on the whole that this would probably disproportionately hurt uh, rural, northern, isolated districts at the expense of downstate, larger urban and suburban districts. And so, again, that would be concerning that, the state is kind of picking winners and losers in terms of district funding from that regard, because it would roll up or eliminate things like transportation reimbursement, which we know helps districts that have lower pupil count relative to their size, that travel a lot of miles on the road. And when we start to, talk about that profile, really starts to come into focus that, a rural, smaller northern district would benefit disproportionately from that. So eliminating that is going to hurt them, of course. So those are some of the things. We think it's a worthy debate, but if we're going to do this, there needs to be really a dedicated discussion about that. And we didn't see the way in which this was introduced was going to benefit school districts in order to rush it through. And I see a few things in the chat, and I'm trying to keep my focus, but I want to make sure that we're addressing those. Transportation money, the UP, of course, there are many examples of UP districts benefiting from this new Section 22L transportation fund, which was implemented, I believe, 2 years ago for the first time. And I know that when they took testimony on this bill, that the UP districts really stepped up and provided some great examples there of how it could benefit. And so I see that as a potential pitfall here.
Jason, one of the questions is about the rolling up of categoricals. Is it an issue of equality over equity? And I would say from the political standpoint, they didn't consider that. They were just trying to roll things up into one big pot of money to put out more to districts. So I don't know that the equality over equity conversation was part of their decisions. And as you were saying, do you really think that rolling those up touches equality or equity?
Honestly, I don't. At least my gut feel says it's really about differences in priorities. My mind goes back to the executive budget proposal that was made back in early February, and that hearing and hearing some of the questions and comments that were made from kind of both sides of the aisle and both chambers of the legislature. It was apparent to me that there were very different and competing priorities. And so we've seen and heard some of that come out, especially in the House of Representatives, as we flipped from a slight Democratic control last session to a slight Republican control this session. There's been a lot of focus and a lot of talk about containing costs, about potential tax cuts, and I would suspect, that supporting local control and distributing dollars on a simpler or easier basis kind of probably goes hand in hand with that. And so that's my read on it. I don't know if that's fair or not, but
And just to touch on that a little bit more on the whole idea of rolling up those categoricals, as many of you know, one of our legislative priorities is to get rid of some of the categoricals in the school aid budget. That has been, we have been accused of being hypocrites by fighting back against the way the House rolled up the categoricals and saying we wanted less categoricals. We sat down with some of the speaker's staff to explain the difference between some of the things they rolled up, and there's obviously a lack of understanding. What we ended up trying to explain is that things like English language learners, isolated districts, even meals are student supports. Those are not a random categorical, a vendor categorical, things that we want to get rid of. What are talking about is those one-off small, tiny grants, $1 million here, 500,000 there, that you have to apply for every single time. That's what we want to get rid of. We want to get rid of the competitive grants. We want to get rid of the things that it doesn't make sense that you have to apply for FIRST Robotics money every single year. What they took was, well, we rolled up categoricals and now you're mad. So we've been trying to explain the difference between some of these categoricals. Special ed millage equalization was rolled up. Things that are direct supports to specific schools to make sure that there is some equity and equality in our learning. So part of the disconnect, I think, on this is legislators not understanding that there are specific student support categoricals that are very important and are well ingrained in our budget. And then there are the things that change every year and the new stuff and the new programs and the vendor things, that there is a vast difference between those two. The other problem with rolling it up is they took all of those supports, and isolated districts is a great example. They took all of their money, which isn't that much, but means a lot to those districts, and putting it in this one big pot. Well, now the money can go to traditionals and charters on an equal basis. But in order to qualify for the money, a district would have to hire an SRO and a mental health staff. We know there are districts that do not want SROs. We also know, and the sheriff's lobbyists actually contacted me immediately. There aren't people. So this money would be tied to a staffing shortage, really, and the inability to be able to hire an SRO, and then you wouldn't receive the additional $1,925 per pupil. The other problem with that money is that there's a lot of one-time money in that, which means if you get that 1,900 this year, they're not going to be able to sustain it into next year. So while a lot of the rhetoric has been, it's 10,025, I think it was,
yes.
But you're going to get this additional 1,925 for a $12,000 per pupil. It is not that simple. And people need to realize that money, that additional money comes with strings and comes with the harm for districts that use some of that for direct student supports.
Great points, Jen. And given my perspective and my experience, I would agree with everything you said there. We do have a couple questions in the chat about withholding of federal funds. And certainly there's been some chatter and some discussion. I see reference to some MDE communication, which I haven't seen yet, but I have been busy over the past hour or so, and I understand that might have been sent out at 11:30 this morning. What we heard was that funds, specifically, as I understand it, Title II-A, Title III, Title IV, which would support professional development, English language learners, and after-school programming, have not been allocated or released by the federal government, by the U.S. Department of Education. And so this is a separate and distinct issue from the budget bill that you're hearing about constantly in the news. The budget bill would appropriate funds that would hit district budgets a year from now, and these are dollars that have already been appropriated at the federal level. And I do see there's a link to the MDE statement. I don't know if I'll be able to read that, but you can see AASA has made a statement, and Jen and I have shared multiple communications on this as well. Again, it appears to be another tactic of the federal administration. My response to a couple of our members was, well, it feels like an illegal move, but that's a little solace to districts at this point in the game when you're scrambling a little bit. We don't have a state budget deal, and there's a lot of uncertainty happening, right? And so while I don't have the full legal or legislative answer, I do think it underscores the importance of what we've been talking about throughout the last couple of years with regards to the stimulus funds being eliminated, making sure that your team has a solid plan for your grants, for what's being funded, that you have a multi-year plan, and that's communicated to the Board of Education is a really important part of the budget process, and it really plays into the budget planning and budget assumptions as well. And so whether or not this will stick, I would guess that it won't, and that those will be released. How exactly that's going to play out from MDE's perspective, I can't fully answer at this time. But I think again, it underscores understanding the sources that you have coming into the district. Are they ongoing or are they one time? And making sure you're budgeting responsibly is really a key piece to this, so that you can deal with the uncertainty and make sound financial decisions that are going to impact your district in the best way possible. And so, Jen, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
No, we've been in touch with NSBA. Nobody has a lot of information except that this is no more legal than when they tried to withhold grants before. I know NSBA is talking to some of their other national counterparts on the possibility of a lawsuit. But at this point, all we know is they said we're not sending money. So I don't have any other information. One of the other questions goes back to the state budget about cyber schools and their per pupil. The governor and the Senate budget both kept cyber school foundation allowance at 80% of the regular foundation allowance, the target foundation allowance. The House budget moves them back up to 100% of the funding. I would expect this is a point of contention that will have to be negotiated. I also wouldn't be surprised if they go back to 100% as they work through the budget and the governor and the Senate have bigger things that they want over the cyber school foundation. That's just my gut from what's happened in the past. But the last couple of years, they've been funded at 80%, but the House budget puts them back at 100%.
Certainly a common proposal that we've heard several times over. So the question on, clarity on federal funds, that piece of the withholding fiscal year 26 funds is probably the most urgent piece there. But we're also expecting, and we've communicated to our membership through our workshops, that we could definitely see some cuts a year out. And we talk about that budget bill that just passed the US Senate. And a lot of the talk has been about Medicaid and SNAP, which is a food program, and that those could definitely have an impact on schools. I believe I've heard Medicaid could impact the overall state in the terms of billions of dollars, and not all of that flowing to schools, obviously. But it really kind of underscores the importance of what Jen mentioned in terms of the overall budget. And I think in talking with some of our members this morning and yesterday, he said, yes, we understand there's a law that the budget needs to be passed, PA 122 of 2020, was passed to say that the budget has to be on the governor's desk on or before July 1. But in some cases, we've already made those decisions, maybe mid-May, and we've set the course for our district budget. We're much more focused on getting this right. And I think some of these factors, when we look at the overall picture, really underscore the importance of that, because school aid fund is in a precarious position here where more university spending could be pushed in. We continue to be proponents of school aid fund dollars should go to support public K-12 education, not universities, not non-public schools, not road funding. And so, there exists the possibility that more university spending could be put in, that dollars could be diverted for that road funds. And, the school aid fund has been pretty healthy in terms of balance over the past couple of years. And so that's certainly an enticing target, I think, for the legislature.
Yeah, so I will speak more to that in a second. First, I want to answer this question about Section 32P, the childhood block grant for ISDs that's in, that the House took out. That is one of the many items they rolled into the other piece of the per pupil. So it gets removed from the budget and becomes part of that pot of money that would go out to ISDs and to LEAs. So it is a bargaining chip as they rolled up all those categoricals. Every one of those is going to be something that has to be talked about. What do we pull back out? What do they leave in? And those are some of the things that the House members need to hear, that rolling this up is not necessarily in the best interest of all of our students. So if you have examples like what's in the chat, share those with your legislators. Make sure that they understand that there are categoricals that matter directly to students. And there are other categoricals that are paperwork and hoops to jump through that aren't necessary. Because right now they're just hearing that, well, it's fine. Like, we wanted to get rid of categoricals. So those are the sorts of things that they need to hear. And to speak to the money for roads, sorry. You're going to say something?
I was just yeah, sorry, didn't mean to cut in there, but you mentioned 32P, early childhood block grant. I'm looking at that list, section 31N for school mental health and support services. That's a big one, $106 million. You mentioned section 56 for special education millage equalization, total of $74 to $75 million in two subsections there. And there's some significant resources there. And I think the temptation from the local district level is to say, well, those are ISD funds. The ISD is doing fine. We don't care too much about that. But realize those millage equalization dollars, for example, I worked at an ISD that was a big beneficiary of that. All of that money flowed into the special education formula for the ISD, and it either directly or indirectly benefited all of the local districts by either increasing special education payouts or reducing special education tuition bills for center-based programming. So this is a complex issue for sure, and it's not as easy as saying the ISD can deal with it. It's a complex web, and these things are interwoven, and a lot of times there could be a direct impact to the local districts if those funds go away or are eliminated.
So to take a step back to that bigger picture of the roads funding conversation and the school aid fund being used to boost up the general fund, as we've seen through since 2010 when it was a loan. The House or the Senate and governor both did add more university money into the school aid fund, but at the tune of, I want to say, like 115 million. I know that is still a lot of money, but the number I'm about to put it against shows why we haven't yelled as much about their budgets. The House put $2 billion worth of higher education money into the school aid fund, leaving only $500,000 of general fund money funding the universities. And we believe that $500,000 is stuff that can't be paid for out of the school aid budget, which is why they can't move it. But it seems very convenient that they moved $1.5 billion extra into our budget when they're looking at a $3 billion roads deal. The other $750 million could come from removing sales tax on gas, So now you're well over $2 billion at the expense of our schools. We've been fighting against this for years and even more so now. The other piece that we keep hearing about is reversing that rate cap, as Jason mentioned earlier. That would take a policy bill. I don't know that they would be able to get that through, but there is talk about taking that 15.75 that we got it reduced to this year, which you haven't even felt the effect of yet, and putting it back at 20.96. The other piece we're hearing is that they could refinance the MIPSR's debt. We're on track to pay it off in the early 2030s. And the other piece that rumor we're hearing is they would stretch that out and then use the money in other places. So this budget fight, a lot of the time in this budget fight has been spent on leaving the dollars for our K-12 classrooms and stop raiding the school aid fund to make up holes in other places. We have joined with a whole bunch of other organizations. We've put out statements once a week now through the month of June, dealing with all of the different rumors we're hearing and all of the reasons that they're terrible. I'll put a link to all of those in the chat if you're interested. Our latest one was last night, and we sent it as soon as the House adjourned to say, you've now broken the law. It is state law that you have to pass a budget and have it to the governor's desk by July 1, and they don't. So not only have they held all of your budgets hostage, but they violated their own law. Unfortunately, there's no teeth there, but it doesn't mean we can't remind anyone and everyone that this legislature that wants accountability for everyone is not even holding themselves accountable to the one thing they need to do in a year. So we continue to push those things. We continue to watch closely. As long as this $3 billion roads plan sits out there, we are very nervous. And as we get more hard information, true information, you will get alerts from us for sure. We don't really want to send them on big rumors because we'd be sending them every day. We don't want to send alerts every day. So stay tuned on that, but that is definitely part of what's dragging this budget out, is the idea that they need to get the money from somewhere. And unfortunately, our school aid fund balance sheet is all too appealing to be used for other purposes. Are there any other budget type questions? We are watching some of the boilerplate in each of the budgets to see where that comes out. The governor has what she calls the SMART program, which is an increased accountability piece for our lowest performing schools. It is incredibly detailed and prescriptive, and there's so much reporting. It seems more like paperwork than an accountability piece. That is not in the Senate or the House budget, so hopefully most of that stays out. In the House budget, of course, we have that additional $1,900 that's tied to school resource officers and mental health staff. But the House budget also has 2 penalty sections that you could lose money for doing certain things. And those things include DE&I initiatives, allowing transgender girls to play on girls' sports teams, having unisex bathrooms with stalls for either gender. It's a lot of the hot button cultural issues, but while those may be worth debating, they do not belong in a budget bill. And it ties a percentage of your funds to each of those things, among others. There's more than just what I listed. It would tie a loss of funding to all of those things. Dyes and foods is another one. For certain chemicals and foods, if you serve that, you can lose part of your funds. So we're hoping that those things come out because they are extremely punitive for things that have nothing to do with student achievement and budgeting. Those are policy discussions to have, not budget discussions. So there are pieces of all the budgets. Senator Camilleri's is a great example of categoricals we could roll up. His has a lot of individual specific categoricals. So there's problems with all of them. There's a good in most of them. But at this point, we just don't know where that final product's going to go. And that includes boilerplate language. So the legislature changing their budget deadline. This was an interesting conversation I had with some new reps when they came in. They asked me why schools changed their fiscal year because it just causes problems for the state. And I had to explain the history of why our fiscal year is different than the state fiscal year. We actually floated the concept of getting the state to move the fiscal year back to July 1 during 2020 and 2021 when we had a lot of money at the state level. It's expensive because to shift the state back, you would have to pay an additional 3 months worth of the state budget. But we had the money then, and people kind of laughed at us. They're not going to move it. But that's the problem is they moved it years ago to get those additional revenues as the economy was starting to tank. And now we're stuck with this bifurcated budget cycle where all of us, community colleges, a lot of local municipalities are sitting around waiting for the state to do what they need to do. This also means that if there is a government shutdown of any kind, it won't occur until October 1st. And it should not affect schools unless we are still shut down when that October state aid payment has to go out. If the government is shut down, then you're not going to get any money. The last time we shut down was for 4 hours. It was overnight. That was it. But just know that the timing for a potential shutdown in the state is October 1, and that there is a cushion there for schools. That doesn't make any of this any better, but just to make sure that you're aware of that. The House is next expected to be in session on July 15th and only the 15th, and then they will be back the week of the 22nd. The Senate is currently scheduled for the 15th, 16th, and 17th, and then they're out again until August. Supposedly, negotiations are going to continue in earnest, and we may see something on July 15th. But if I had a nickel for every time they gave us a date and blew past it, I would have retired. So we're waiting. We're trying to be hopeful. Signals from what the House was looking at last night were positive, but they weren't negotiated. We need all three of them to sit down in a room and come to an agreement. And until it is a negotiated agreement, you're going to continue to have finger pointing and blame from each side of the chambers to the other. So I understand your point, Roger. Yes, July 1 is not a good date either. But we have never been able to get the budget any earlier than the beginning of June. I think the earliest since I've been here was the second week of June. You'll hear people every once in a while be like, we're going to do it by Memorial Day. They never get there. So yes, we know you need numbers sooner than June 30th. But because that is such a hard line, both statutorily and for your fiscal year, that's why we yell about it all the time. If we could get it done sooner, that'd be amazing. But the legislature just never seems to be able to do that. Anything else to add, Jason?
No, Roger and I actually discussed or maybe even debated that one a little bit earlier today. But yeah, I think if if we were just 1 or 2 ticks away from getting the budget deal done on July 1, I think that's one thing. But what's concerning is maybe the lack of progress or how far apart they are at this point. So I wholeheartedly agree. We take a great budget deal on August 1st. But we need to make sure it's a great budget deal for Michigan schools, no matter what, no matter when it comes. I did post a little blurb. You mentioned if this drags out and if we get into government shutdown territory, October is the first state aid payment that your district will get. You get 11 payments that run monthly from October through August for the fiscal year. And that's scheduled for the 20th. I didn't check to see if that's on a weekend this year, but it's either on the 20th, 21st, or 22nd, depending if there's a holiday or a weekend. Naturally, MDE would need a couple days to turn that around. But to Jen's point, if we had a 3-hour shutdown, that's not going to interfere with your October 20th state aid payment. So just to give you a little context there.
And as we've put out these statements, the one yesterday was very clear that, yes, you blew past your statutory deadline and our budget deadline, but we're not asking you to slap something together and pass it. We want a completed, responsible school aid budget. We just want it done a lot quicker than you're doing it. And there's a question about the food requirements. So there is a policy bill that is different than the language that's in the House budget. House Bill 4369, sponsored by Brad Paquette, would put the onus on the food distributors to say that any food they distribute to a school may not have certain chemicals and dyes in it. That bill passed late last night. They don't have the vote up yet, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. But it was probably about 9 o'clock last night when that bill passed. It'll go to the Senate now. We have no problem with that, and believe that the onus should be on where we get our food, not on the district, which is where it started. To say the district would have to make sure this wasn't happening. But if your suppliers are giving you food with that in there, with any of these included, what are you supposed to do? There are very few. I see someone says we could get back to cooking from scratch, which would be great if every district could do that, and they can't. So they have changed that bill to make sure that any food coming to a school to be served to students would not have any of those dyes and chemicals that are listed within the bill and the things that you hear in the news a lot. So that will go to the Senate. I don't know what its fate will be there because this just happened last night, but we will certainly look into it. Anything addressed with free lunches? So the free meals program was increased in funding this year, so you should be getting the amount you spend, you should be getting reimbursed by the state for the difference between what the feds send you and what you spend. The House rolled that into the 22F per pupil piece. So there isn't direct reimbursement for school meals in the House plan. There is in the Senate and the governor's plan. And I know that's a big priority of the governor. So I would expect her to push for that to continue. And hopefully, as you look at it, as you look at your meal costs, you are receiving back from MDE the difference between the cost of the meal, what the feds send you, so that there shouldn't be a cost for the meals that come out of your school budget. When you get into the a la carte side, that's different. It's handled differently, but at least the free breakfast and lunch meals should be fully covered by what you get back from the state.
Jen, one of the things we've heard from a lot of districts is that excess fund balance in the food service fund continues to be a concern, or at least an issue that districts are dealing with. I don't know how pervasive that is, but I hear that more often than concerns about costs or overspending. I don't want to be dismissive of Mary Beth's comment, but that might give some perspective that high fund balances in the food service fund might be more the rule rather than the exception right now too.
We have not seen any changes at the federal level. We had heard for a while that meals was on the chopping block. We have been told for months now that has been taken away, that the federal meals program will continue. If it were to be, if the feds were to stop the free meals program, it's a $900 million hit to Michigan. So it would be really hard for us to absorb. But for now, we shouldn't we shouldn't have to worry about the federal program. If the state doesn't fund free meals again in that specific line item, it will be up to districts if you want to do it or not. The House has made that comment a couple times that we're going to give you this money and you get the choice. And free meals is one of those. So you will get this, provided you hire an SRO and a mental health professional, you will get the $19.25 extra per pupil. And with that, you have to decide what to spend it on. And free meals would be one of those things on the list. Because there wouldn't be a requirement and there wouldn't be a direct appropriation for free meals.
And I believe that state appropriation right now is about 200 million per year, to give you some context of the federal dollars coming in as well.
Right. The feds about decreasing the percent to qualify for community feeding, we had heard that too. A lot of those things have died down. I don't know that those are going to happen still, but obviously we, along with our counterparts at the federal level, are keeping an eye on it, because to change that would change a lot. It wouldn't just be the free meals piece. But we will continue to watch that. For now, I think our federal meals program is safe. I think where you're seeing the cuts instead at the federal level are going to be in your families that are on Medicaid and your families that are on SNAP. So there will be an effect on schools, but it shouldn't be through that meals program. Are there any other non-budget questions? Believe it or not, there are very little other things going on, but are there other questions of rumors, policy, things that may be happening that you have a question on other than the budget at the legislative level? So this has come up a couple of times, so I will address it. But yes, MASB is ending their partnership with Neola. If you have questions about that, I would defer to our executive director, Don Watruba. I'd be happy to put you in contact with them, but that is not something that my department works with. So I am not involved in that very detailed. So I would refer you to reach out to our executive director if you have questions about that contract. We do not know the profit margin that food vendors make off of the free school lunch program. My guess is it would be the same as it was before. Because they're still getting paid. It's just getting paid in a different way. But I do not have that information. I don't even know if MDE would have that information, because the food vendors would not have to report their profit margin. School districts contracting with public transit agency. I did hear that there was legislation introduced that would deal with allowing school districts to contract with public transit agencies. I don't know much about it. It was just brought to my attention this week. And we've been a little distracted, so I have not been able to look into that, but I certainly will. The commitment to free preschool, the Senate and the House, or the Senate and the governor, continue to expand GSRP. This last one said that the last budget removed all income level requirements in the Senate and the House, or the Senate and the governor versions, and open those programs up to any 4-year-old, with priority to those from lower income families. The House removed that and put the income levels back in. They continued GSRP. They did not really expand much of the program or much of the funding. So again, that's going to be part of what they have to negotiate is, are we going to open this up to all 4-year-olds? Or are we going to keep the income piece to it? We haven't had much of an income piece for the last 2 years. So we'll have to see what comes out of that. Jason put in there a link to all of the amazing work they do on the budget. I highly recommend, if you're looking for questions, or if you have questions, check those out. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to either of us, or Brenda, our assistant director, is on this call too. Feel free to reach out to any of us. If you have questions, we hope you enjoy your summer while we stare at the legislature while they do nothing. But like I said, we do not expect them to do anything until July 15th. So stay tuned. We will probably put together this is what the budget finally looks like webinar, it will come out very quickly based on whenever we get information from them. But in the meantime, I know MSBO has updates. We will do our weekly updates when session is in session. But in the meantime, please feel free to reach out anytime and ask us any questions. We will send out the recording for this tomorrow in a day early news from the Capitol. And please note that the MASB offices will be closed starting at noon tomorrow for the weekend. So we will send all of our updates before that. And we hope you all have a healthy and wonderful July 4th. Thanks for being here today.